Hey, Allison Verhalen here with AV Writing Services, and today I am talking about the antitrust lawsuit against Google and what it might mean for the future of SEO. So you may or may not have heard that the US Department of Justice, the DOJ, recently filed this. It's a pretty big lawsuit against Google. This is not one of your slap on the wrist kind of lawsuits. This is, if the DOJ is successful, it could require Google to significantly break down and step back from the market in a big way. So when we talk about SEO, we talk about Google. I mean, let's be real. What we mean is Google's algorithm. How can we show up on the first page of Google? How many times have you heard that or said that? This is what it takes to show up on the first page of Google, or how do I get on the first page of Google? We need to get on the first page of Google because no one looks past, a few people look past the first page of Google if they're really looking for something, but most people are going to look at that first page, and the higher up you are, the more likely you are to convert people. And there's all the different factors in Google's search engine, right? And that's what we all talk about. We recognize that there are other search engines, and Google is arguing this in their case, saying no, there's Amazon. They have their own search engine. Every social media platform has their own search engine. There's Bing, there's Yahoo, there's DuckDuckGo. If you really don't want to use Google, you don't have to. But Google does have agreements to pay a lot of money to manufacturers of computers and mobile devices, like the phone I am using to record this on. They have agreements with companies like Apple and Microsoft to make sure that Google is the default browser on every single device that they make, and manufacturers are prohibited from pre-installing other search engines onto their devices. Now, that does not mean that the user cannot install their favorite search engine when they get the device and set it up. They absolutely can, but Google is very much the default, and who's really going to go through and make sure that another search engine is their default browser instead of Google? Most people aren't going to bother. A few people will. A few people are very loyal to, again, either Bing or DuckDuckGo or Yahoo or whatever their preferred search engine is. That's what they want to go to, and they will go through the trouble of installing it once they set up their device. But that's a very small share of the market. Google has, I can't remember exactly, I want to say it's more than 90% of the search engine market. And that's just the search engine, right? Then we've got Gmail and Google Maps and Google Hangout and Google Meet, and YouTube is owned by Google, which I think a lot of people forget. So there are all these different pies that Google has its fingers in, and it is getting really big. So what the antitrust lawsuit means is basically that Google is too big. It's a monopoly. Monopolies are bad for capitalism. That's why we want to shut them down. And that kind of agreement that Google has to say that it has to be pre-installed on every device as the default browser. No one else you cannot install a competing search engine on the devices before they're sold. That kind of agreement was determined to be anti-competitive. It's illegal. You can't do that. That was back in 1998, I want to say, when Microsoft was sued. That was for the antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft. That was one of the conclusions that they reached, was that kind of behavior that Google is currently using. That's illegal. You can't do that because it limits the market. So why is this bad? Why is it bad that Google is so big? How is that bad for capitalism? Well, on the one hand, it means that no one has a realistic chance of competing. Again, when you have something that large, and again, we talk about this all the time, in the fact that when you talk about SEO, you're really talking about Google. You don't specifically say Google. A lot of the time we do, but a lot of the time when we talk about SEO, it's just assumed that we're talking about Google's algorithm, because that's the search engine that the vast majority of people use. I don't see a whole lot of information on Bing or Yahoo or DuckDuckGo. I know it's out there if you really want to go looking for it, but again, their market share is so small that they don't have a very realistic chance of competing. So what that means for us as consumers is we might not be getting the best possible search engine that there is because we only have Google, basically. There could be other companies that come up with newer, more innovative, better ways of doing things, but because they can't get past this giant roadblock that is Google, there's just no way for them to break through that market and get their products in front of us, the users, right? So maybe the product that we're using is not as good as it possibly could be, even though Google is constantly updating their algorithm and trying to come up with ways to make it better. Google is still just one company with a certain way of doing things, right? The idea behind capitalism is when you have all kinds of people doing all kinds of things, that you're gonna get the best product or service because that's what's going to rise to the top, is the people who do it better. But if one company rises to the top early on and then blocks everyone else, you don't get that outside perspective from all those other companies. So we don't know what we're missing out on. The other problem is that Google can charge its own prices. Now, admittedly, most of Google stuff is free, unless you're trying to advertise online. You can try to advertise on Bing or Yahoo or DuckDuckGo, but most people are going to go to Google to get to advertise their products or services, to really try and get in front of their target audience. But that means Google gets to set those prices. Now, to an extent, it's an auction type affair where, certain keywords and search terms, people are willing and able to pay a whole lot of money to get their ads to show up for those search terms. And other search terms are not as highly valued, so you don't have to pay as much for them. It is largely determined by the market, but because the market is basically Google at this point, there's a possibility that someone else could be selling the same stuff for less money, the same placement, the same visibility for less money, if they were allowed to compete with Google. But because there is no way to really compete with Google at this point, we are stuck with Google's prices. So the DOJ is trying to cut Google down to size and really get them to step back from the market so that we have other search engines that can take a more prominent role in the world of the internet. So what does this mean for SEO strategists? Because if Google is made to cut down and really step back, that's going to change the way we do everything, right? I mean, just think about the fact that when we say that we're going to search for something online, we say that we'll Google it. Google has done such a good job of infiltrating the market that it has become a verb, that Google equals conducting an online search, right? So that's how ingrained they are into that aspect of the market and even into our psyche. I mean, most people don't even think of using anything else. So if we have to think about other things, what is that going to mean for us? Well, on the one hand, we as content strategists and SEO strategists, we are going to need to diversify. Just like for social media strategists, they tend to look at, don't try to be on all of the social media channels because your target audience is not on all the social media channels. If your target audience is older, they might be on Facebook or Instagram. If they're younger, they might be on Twitter or Snapchat. And if they're really young, maybe they're on TikTok. Right, so those are the kinds of things that you have to think about. We might have to think about that as well. Our target audience might start to drift towards certain search engines. Some of them are going to continue to prefer Google and use Google. Other people might like the fact that DuckDuckGo doesn't keep track of all your data the way Google does. So a lot of people go that way for that reason. So what is valuable to your customer? What is easy for your customer? What is easy for them to use? That's what they're gonna drift towards. So that's gonna have to factor into our strategy. Again, this is all hypothetical. This is if the DOJ is successful in pursuing this antitrust lawsuit against Google. If we have to diversify, then our keyword tools, all of our SEO tools, are also going to need to diversify. When we search keywords, the main place that those keywords get their data from is Google. Who's who, first of all, and then also how many people are putting this search term into Google's search bar, and how many other people online or other websites already have this content. All of that is factored in through Google. What are the most common questions? I use Answer the Public all the time, which I love. You put in a search term and it tells you the most common questions that get entered into search bars on Google associated with that search term. And that's how I come up with almost all of my blog post topics. So that is super helpful. But again, if Google doesn't have as much of a share of the market, then we're going to have to, those keyword tools are going to have to diversify, and they're going to have to start pulling data from other search engines, which could be really tricky because, again, DuckDuckGo does not keep track of people's data, so they might not have as much data to provide to companies like those keyword research tools and those SEO tools. That could be something that we have to deal with. So we're going to have to just figure it out and adjust accordingly. And that privacy stuff is another big factor is Google, because we're not using, you don't pay for Google's search engine, which means you are the product, right? If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Google is taking all of the information. They track everything that you search for, where you are, where else you go online, how long you hang out there, what you do when you're there. They track all of that. They know everything about us. And so that might have to change too. That might be another lawsuit. It's that kind of thing that has already been starting to get into the legislative courts as far as figuring out what the limits are of our privacy online. It used to be a choice whether you go online, whether you use Google, and now it's not even really a choice. We need the internet in order to do our jobs, in order to connect with people, in order to communicate with people. You gotta be online. I would bet a very, very few people are not online. It's really tough. So that is something to consider as well. And then we've got video and voice search. Voice search is one of the few markets that Google has not dominated, right? So we've got a few options. We do have Google's Home, their smart speaker, Google Home is what it's called, and then we have Amazon's Echo. Amazon's Echo is actually dominating that market. They have like 70% of the market, give or take, and Google only has like 30% of the market. So voice search, we've talked about this a lot in SEO for at least a year or two now, the fact that it's climbing in the world of SEO. That means people, because they're verbally asking their smart speaker for information, and their smart speaker provides them the information. It verbally tells them the answers they want to know or the information that they found on that particular topic. That's how search is evolving. So when you verbally ask a question, it's going to come out different than when you're typing a few words into a search bar. So that means that the people who are creating the content, who are trying to get in front of those people who are asking those questions, we are going to have to adjust the keywords and the search terms and the phrasing that we use in our content to make sure that we're showing up in those searches. But again, Google has not dominated that market. Amazon's Echo uses Bing. So if people are asking their smart speaker for information, they're not going to Google. 70% of them are going to Bing instead of Google. And as voice search continues to grow and we continue to get more and more smart speakers into people's homes, we might get more and more people using Bing. We might have a larger percentage of the population going towards Bing rather than Google. So that is definitely something to take into consideration. Now, on the one hand, Google has started climbing in the ranks. They were at like 30% a year or two ago, and then they were at like 31 or 32%. Still, Amazon's Echo is still winning by a pretty wide margin. And again, if this lawsuit against Google is successful, it might make it more difficult for Google to really make a break into that market. So we don't know, but that again is something to consider. And then again, video. Video is huge. It has been for a while. It has been growing. It is continuing to grow. Most people, I know I'm in the minority here, I'd rather read a blog post because I can just skim it, whereas with a video, I don't know how long I'm gonna have to watch this thing, and I might not have 15-20 minutes to watch an entire video, whereas with a blog post, I can just skim and go straight to the part that interests me, get the information I need, get out. But I'm in the minority. Most people are much more likely to watch a video than they are to read an entire blog post or even skim the blog post. They're much more likely to engage with a video. So that's going to continue to be a big thing. And again, Google owns YouTube. And YouTube is one of the biggest things that we think of when we think of video. You can absolutely post videos directly onto various social media sites. A lot of people do. But there's a time limit on those, and if you want to create longer videos like this, it's got to go up on YouTube, and then you can link to the YouTube video on your other social network sites to try and distribute that video. But most people, when they want a video tutorial telling them how to do something, they go straight to YouTube for that. It's a huge market to teach people how to do things for themselves, and people know that, so they go straight there. So something to consider, food for thought. Like I said, we do not know yet what the outcome will be of this lawsuit, whether Google will successfully defend their position or whether they'll have to pull back on some of their allegedly anti-competitive practices. So quick disclaimer, I am not an attorney, but I have written about this kind of stuff for attorneys who do specialize in this area of the law. So I know much more about this than I ever thought I would. So if you have any questions about this lawsuit, about the future of SEO, what it could mean for Google, how we should adapt, feel free to reach out. You can find us at the website is avwritingservices.com. You can reach me directly at info@avwritingservices.com. Thanks so much. Have a great week and happy marketing.